Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session of Sessions with Bob and Lena. I'm Bob Gordon.
And I'm Lena Derhali, and our episode today is titled The Reality of Being a Black Woman According to Alison and Latasha. And we are joined by two very special guests. We're very honored to have them speaking with us, Alison and Latasha. Before we throw it to them to introduce themselves, Bob, did you want to say a little bit about what this episode is about and why we asked Alison and Latasha to be here with us?
Yeah, just so you all know, this episode is post murder of George Floyd. We've had that was just more than 2 weeks ago. We've had so much discussion in America, so many protests and demonstrations, and we just felt like we should offer this platform for some other voices tonight and two people who we know and respect. The impetus was two things. Something Lena mentioned as we were talking before we started recording, which was one of the graffiti I saw during the protests. Can you say it again, Lena, the one you mentioned a minute ago?
All mothers were summoned when he called out for his mama.
Yeah, that hit people hard, and it certainly hit me hard. And Latasha, just about the same time, that's Latasha Harrison, by the way, and Alison Crockett, sent a video to her staff, which includes Lena and I. We're all part of the Imago Center of Washington, D.C. I know Allison has some experience with or some background in Imago as well. So we're all well versed in that. But it was this video that I'm about to show that Latasha shared that made us think, we need to do something, with this platform right now, and let me show it.
I dare you. Ask yourself, when did my baby become a threat to you?
When I cried. When I started to crawl. When I started to speak. When I started to run. When I started to dream. When I laughed for joy. When I played with my toy gun. When I learned to read. When my jeans were too baggy.
When I wore a hoodie. When I drove a car.
When I left the library late from studying. When I protected my family.
When you need jail cells filled. When I'm less than perfect.
When I went for a run.
When I went to the store.
When I fought for your country.
When I held my arms and my hands high.
When I finally earned my degree.
When I loved with my heart and soul.
When I sat enjoying my coffee.
When I go for a job interview.
When the dictation of my speech was not like yours.
When white women become uncomfortable.
When I protested the injustice of the cage you built.
When I wear a mask to protect you and myself.
When I raise my voice.
When I move too fast.
When I breathe.
When did my baby become a threat to you?
When I was born.
When did my baby become a threat to you?
So I'm opening our window back up again. There we go. Excuse me, viewers and listeners, while I get our big window back up. Okay.
That was powerful stuff.
So, Latasha, I was going to start by asking you, what had you share that with us, your staff, and how did it impact you?
Well, I thought it was important to share it with our staff, particularly because we're a staff of therapists. And knowing that we will see clients of all colors in front of us, and to understand the racial trauma that many African Americans come to our center with. And in order to have that information, it empowers us to do our job better. So I thought it was important that the conversation began, when did I become a threat to you? And so I needed that to be a catalyst for future discussions that we would have at the Imago Center.
Have you seen any discussions yet? I know you heard back from some of us about that it was a powerful video, and heard back from us. Any other discussions happening about having shared that?
So we have had discussions during our staff meetings at the Imago Center in reference to that. But also I have tried to figure out, how do I share this word with people? I am not the person that's going to go out and participate in the protest because of COVID-19. That's my choice. However, I can protest and help others to see what is going on. So I decided that I would look at my sphere of reference around me. So where I work, how can I make a difference? How can we begin to look at, why are there no African American people in this particular position? Why are African American boys being labeled as emotionally disturbed at a disproportionate rate? Why are African American people deciding that they'll divorce rather than go to counseling? So these are the questions that I began to ask myself, and I decided that I would touch where I can touch, reach where I can reach, and therefore it will be hopefully a rippling effect.
Thank you. Latasha, would you mind just sharing with people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah.
Anything that you think is important for people listening to know?
So I am Latasha Harrison, and I like to share this because it's important to me. I have 4 masters and a doctorate, so I'm Dr. Harrison, and I work in a public school system as well as a counselor for couples. I turned my pain into passion by moving into therapy and working with couples. And so I work at the University of Bowie State University, and that's another area where I can touch and bring teachers into a system that is notorious or does not have a high rate of African-American teachers, although they have African-American students sitting in the seats. So that's what I do. That's what I enjoy doing. And I also own a business with my husband, Limitless Love. We coach and counsel couples as a team. And we do workshops and podcasts and videos and all kinds of things in reference to couples, especially African-American couples.
Very important work that you do.
Alison,
what do you want people to know about you, and anything you want to add about the video that we showed?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a musician. And I call myself that first because everything for me flows from that. I am a recording artist. I've been a recording artist and touring artist for 20 years. And I have about 5-6 records to my name. I've recorded with a lot of different people in jazz and soul and house music and electronica and all sorts of different things. I also am an educator, a choral director and an educator. I'm a college professor at George Washington University in their music department. I also worked in K through 12 education outside of the school system as well as inside the school system in DCPS. And I used a lot of the things that I was doing with choral music and vocal music to deal with social emotional learning and how it is to be a human being. I even wrote songs about it and taught them to my students very specifically. Like one of the songs that I wrote was, I am a human being. I am strong, intelligent, loving. I'm a descendant of eminent scholars, prophets, kings, and queens. I am humble, but bow to no man. I walk in peace, respecting everyone. I am a human being. That's who I am, human. And that came from, that was changed from the Malcolm X pledge that a fellow teacher of mine found and was giving to her students and having them say those things, those words. And so I decided to put those words to music. And so a lot of my students, you know, they needed to understand what being a human was. I worked with a lot of different populations, most especially Black and Hispanic populations, and I found that our young people, though they understood what being a human was, they didn't really understand what being a human was, what it actually entailed. And I thought that that particular pledge allowed them to be able to sing it, do hand motions with it, all sorts of things allowed them to kind of understand that. And so I when I look at that video, I see what it is that I'm talking about. Humanity. You know, what is it about these young humans as they move up to being a threat? What is it, what is threatening? Because I saw that. If you've worked in education, you see it, that people consider Black boys a threat at literally every age. And so it was always, and because there might have been some issues that showed out in the classroom, sometimes you got frustrated or they were labeled simply because people were loud, or they wanted to bang on their desks, or they didn't adjust to authority in the same ways. You know, just they were threats as opposed to high-strung boys. You know, and that is the thing that I look at. It's that Black men, or just men of color in general, are perceived as threats, doing the same behavior that white boys and men are doing, same exact behavior.
If I might, that's really interesting that you would say that, because this is important that we understand that we have diverse learners in the classroom. And so just because someone does not fit into the box that another student might fit into, do they become labeled? They do become labeled. And so we as educators have to figure out, what do we do different? It's not about the kid. It's not about this African-American boy who is different in your classroom, according to you. But it's very important that we look at it very differently. We need to change our skill and sharpen our skill set, put some more tools in our repertoire, right? And so it's interesting that we talk about African-American boys and Caucasian boys. African-American boys are twice as likely to be suspended for the same offense, the same exact offense that a Caucasian child is not suspended for. I remember being in a school system in Georgia, and a student came and he was expelled for getting into a fight, So I said, well, why didn't you tell your story? What is going on? He said, it didn't matter if I told my story, because Johnny's story was going to be more believable than my story, simply because of the color of my skin. And so I wrestled with that for a long time as a leader in a school system that I was in. How do I help our African-American boys, African-American children, all children, but particularly the children that are on, like if the house is burning, the house is burning. This house is burning right now. African-American boys have a voice in a system where they're voiceless. And so we have other things that we need to do and work that we need to do around advocating for themselves in a way that is acceptable in some people's eyes, because we have to learn to do what happens in the school system. We have to learn the lay of the law. Mm-hmm. And so we have to learn how to advocate in a way that is acceptable in that particular arena.
Yeah, and that pathologizing lasts throughout life. And, you know, when you're talking about your story, I think about Khalif Browder, if you're familiar. He had stolen a backpack, and then he was in solitary confinement for years at Rikers Island.
Yes.
And when he got out, you know, he was suffering severe depression, because you put somebody in solitary confinement like that, it's, you know, one of the worst tortures you can think of to isolate him. And he just could never fully recover, and he ended up committing suicide. And, you know, to me, this is one of the tragic stories that, you know, that he stole a backpack.
Yes, over a backpack.
A backpack. And a white man, that would never happen. A white man would never go to solitary confinement or even prison for stealing a backpack. You know, it's almost like when we look at rape culture and these rich white boys, you know, they get, you know, these really small slaps on the wrist for a lot of it. And we have the same situation with a Black college student, their punishment is so much harsher. So this is pervasive throughout life. It starts, as you said, when they're young, and you know, it's just unacceptable.
I have a story. Again, we were living in Georgia, my son and I, and he came home from school one day, and he said, "Mom, the principal called me to his office." Meanwhile, nobody had ever called me, nothing. I had no idea. Principal called me to his office. I said, "What did you get called to the office for?" My son is a very mild child, so call to the office is not something that a normal pattern for him. He said that I stole somebody's cell phone. And I said, "Well, why would he say you stole somebody's cell phone?" He said, "Well, the cell phone was missing and me and several people were there. So he said I stole the cell phone." And I said, "Well, did you steal a cell phone?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell him that you didn't steal a cell phone?" He said, "He never asked." I said, "Well, who stole the cell phone?" And he said, "So-and-so stole the cell phone." "Why didn't you tell?" He never asked. They just assumed, simply because he was the only African-American boy in that locker room, that he took the cell phone. But he did inform them. As crazy as this might seem, my mom would give me anything I want. I don't have to steal it. So,
sorry, go ahead.
That happens quite often. And that could have been my child in Rikers Island because of a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why, and this may be more of a question for white people, but why do you, our guests, what do you attribute that fear of Black males to? Any theories?
The only theory that I have is generational fear and guilt over what has happened, and a consistent and constant portrayal as Black people as animalistic, women as ultrasexual, men as ultra powerful. You know, it might seem great that Paul Robeson was considered, you know, this powerful, strong African prince type of person in movies. However, that ultra power, ultra sexualization, you know, also dehumanizes at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, also, you know, boys are, you know, they assume that they don't feel pain. They assume that Black people don't feel pain as much. They assume that we don't have the same kind of emotions. It's just something that has been generational, has been inculcated in the media, in books, movies, everywhere. And so, you know, that's the only thing that I've got, because, you know, we're all just human.
Yeah. Latasha, any thoughts? Thank you.
I agree, because it has to be generational. this is what my grandparents did, my great-grandparents did, and it's kind of a mindset that is passed down from generation to generation, and nobody is willing to debunk that. Nobody is willing to say, that's not really accurate information because we know such and such and such and such, and that's not the way they respond. I was in one of the classes at Loyola University, and we were in our cultural class that we all have to take to become counselors. And one of my classmates said, African American women are mean and they're very bitchy. That's what he said. And so I said to him, am I mean and bitchy? He was like, no, you're different. I was like, because I gave you cookies the other day. I gave you tickets to the African American Museum. I talk to you all the time. Why are you stereotyping all women? And it was an opportunity for me to have that conversation, because I'm always willing to have the conversation around race. It does not offend me. It does not hurt me. And sometimes it offends other people, but that's your problem, because the conversation needs to be had. So the conversation is not all Black women. You may have been exposed, or you might have been in a situation where there was an African American woman who did not treat you the way you thought they should treat you. And I also said to him, some of the things that you say are very offensive. And I can imagine if someone didn't have a heart to be curious rather than furious, they would get angry with you. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you need to shift the way in which you're thinking about having conversations with people. Because I'm not being what you said. I'm not that person that you said. I mean, I could be, but I'm not, right? If pushed up against the wall, I could be those things. Well, but on a day-to-day basis, that's not what it is.
But that brings up the very point that when you are used to people coming at you in a certain way and you're just like, you get tired and you don't have as much patience. Where a person could be coming at you for whatever reason, they just had a bad day, or they didn't have a bad day, or they just have whatever it is that they have. But if 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc. times that has been leveled at you, sometimes people just don't have the patience anymore. And sometimes we'll just act up just like that quote unquote stereotype just to screw with you. Because it's like I remember growing up in school, and I remember just because we were just so tired of people putting hands in our hair. Oh, your hair is so pretty, or this, or can I touch it? It's hair, daggit, it's hair. And they would just put their hands in their hair, and we're like, what are you doing? And finally, a girlfriend of mine, she had braids. And it was just, one day she didn't and one day she did. And that's common in the Black community, that, you get weaves, you have a wig, or you get cornrows or braids. And some young white girls coming up, it's like, oh, how did you get these braids? And we just got mad. It was just like, they just grew in that way. It's like, that's just how it happens, it's how it comes out.
Alison, and a couple of our text exchanges, you mentioned that idea of, you hope that we would, or one of our text exchanges, you mentioned you hope that we would talk about not just the kind of overt threats from brutal police or brutal anybody else, but the covert, not necessarily secret, but
microaggressions
that are threats day to day. And I'm seeing a lot of folks on, people of color on Facebook just mentioning kind of like, these are some of the things that happened as I was growing up, and I'm an American, but this has been my life. And I wonder, what are some of those microaggressions that get you that kind of tired? I mean, you mentioned a couple, like people thinking they can just freely mess with your hair. What else?
Well, the thing that I've done before I answer that question that, Latasha was saying is I too didn't feel like I could go out and protest because I have a child with asthma. and a mother who is immunocompromised. So I said that I really can't do this. What I've tried to do is to literally, as an artist, write my stories, knowing that there are people, and write them in ways that are not particularly, write them in ways that I've always wanted to be able to say to white people. And I appreciate that there is this space that has been opened. It's very difficult to say these things because you're constantly concerned about how they're going to come off. Are you going to have an argument? Is there going to be a problem with your employment, a problem with your friendship, or what? Are you going to be perceived differently? Are you going to be perceived angry? Are you going to be sometimes you just don't say anything. So what I've started saying is writing out the things that, that I feel like a lot of Black people want to say. So, for example, just recently, I was at Trader Joe's, and this happens to me maybe once a year, once,
I saw your post about it. Yeah, please go ahead.
There's always somebody, it's generally in an area that is predominantly white. And it's either in a parking lot or in the cash register or whatever it is. And we all have stories like this. And so I wrote this story down on Facebook because it just happened. And, I'm dancing around. I got my music in, I'm listening, I'm dancing, I'm smiling. The cash register's like, hey, and he starts dancing and other people start dancing. And I'm up at the end, there's a long line. I had to wait and I got to the front. Yay, I'm there checking out my stuff. And an older white gentleman comes and he says something, I didn't hear him. So I asked him to repeat it. He said, are you cheating? And I didn't know what he was talking about. Am I cheating? What are you talking about? I'm sitting here dancing. It's like, well, are you just dancing and having fun, or are you cheating? Where did cheating come from? Me being in line. And this is something that I've commonly had to do. I've had to say, look, the line is over there. There's a line. Go over there and just let it be. Just let it be, because it's like, it's not worth it. Dude is old. He has a certain set of, beliefs. I'm not hurt much, but it's, I always take issue with the term microaggression. I understand why it's called that, but it doesn't feel micro. It doesn't feel small when it happens over and over and over again. I've had people hit my car with their fist because I was driving and I was in the crosswalk trying to make a right turn, and the man decided to smack my car and yell at me because I was in the crosswalk trying to make a right turn. And I'm like, what? How do you have the gall to hit my car with your fist? And he started yelling at me like I have done something, like he is the boss of me. I've had pulling up into a parking lot. I call these like the grocery store sessions, because it always happens at a grocery store parking lot or something like that. And I was pulling into a parking space, and and I just pulled in and then got out of my car, and the guy said, he came out and said, you should have pulled all the way through. There was space. I said, I don't have to do what you want me to do. I'm not your child. I've had women scream at me and yell, shame, shame, because I left a grocery store cart in an area that was not in front of the store, but in the parking area, because there was no place to put it. I put it in a place where there are no cars where I had a 6-month-old at the time. It was 85 degrees outside. And so I wasn't going to do that. I knew people would come and get it. And she just started yelling at me from her car, shame. Like I'm like, what? Yeah. And so these things over and over and over again say, well, why are you starting to criminalize me for things that are not, how do you go from, oh, you should have put that away, to shame on you,
Right.
which is what happened with Mr. Brooks down in Atlanta. In terms of how do you go from a person sleeping drunk in their car to shooting him in the back? It doesn't matter that he was fighting. There are white people who fight all the time. He was drunk. He probably was scared because of all the things that were going on. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. He had to have a conversation with them for half an hour. Please let me go home. Why don't you just, how does he get shot out of being drunk in a car and having a non-lethal taser and discharging it? How do you go from this to this? And when I read, I watched it on YouTube, and I read comment after comment saying, oh, well, it was completely justified. Yeah, they shot, that was right. They kept over and over, well, yeah, he shouldn't have fought. Well, he fired at them. He shouldn't have fought. He shouldn't have resisted arrest. What?
Yeah. And, I've seen story after story on Facebook and other social media the past few weeks about things where whites created a disturbance that would have gotten any black person killed. And they were taken out for chicken afterwards by the police. I mean, just crazy stuff.
The Dylan Roof, who was the guy who shot up the black church, they said they had him in the police car. He was hungry. They took him to Burger King.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the one that I've seen that's really standing out when they saying, they take a white guy to Burger King who just mass murdered a bunch of people. And to your point, Allison, like a white man can do that and get taken to Burger King by the police.
And looking at just even Lena's body language and my body language, as you all are describing some of these things, we're kind of shaking our heads in disbelief, which I know, good-hearted white people do all the time. Like, oh my God, I had no idea, I didn't know, comes as a huge surprise to us, but not to you, not to black citizens. How does this, I know you may not have the answer to this, but I just kind of wonder, how does it happen? It's certainly visible to you and not to us, because I don't see, I don't see it. Now I look, I tape police interactions with black people on my iPhone since a ways back, but I had to get educated, to do that. So much happens that other people don't see. I guess that's what I'm saying. Latasha, I was wondering some of the things that an educated black PhD, simply because of color, runs into, where people just make an assumption, has nothing.
I run into all kinds of things. So I'll give you an example. I go to my children are in elementary school. I'm going to go to a baseball game with my husband. So I have my Orioles outfit on. I go to the school. The principal's like, there's no more room in this school. You cannot come see the school. I go the next day with my suit on, and I'm taking a tour of the entire school.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, it should not matter what I look like. And I tell teachers this all the time. When parents come in, whether they have their pajamas on or they have a 3-piece suit on, they need to be treated the same way. Everybody in that space needs to be treated in a way in which they feel comfortable and are treated with dignity. So it doesn't matter whether they've been to jail or Yale. Mm-hmm. Everybody comes in the building should be treated with a certain amount of respect. This happens over and over and over again to people of color. We are judged simply by what we have on. Mm-hmm. But Bill Gates will come in with run over shoes and jeans, and he's a great guy. He's just being frugal with his money or whatever. But unless we as a people present ourselves in a certain way, we are treated less like we're not treated with the respect and dignity that we ought to be treated. Any human being should be treated. Any human. I'm on social media all the time. And so I think I'm a little different than Alison because I'm going to speak about it. So if you hurt my feelings or if you say something to me in a store, I'm going to be very calm and I'm going to say, you know what? That was not nice. That hurt my feelings. And a lot of times, many people are caught off guard because, oh, wow, you said something, right? But I'll let you know, you hurt my feelings. That's not nice. I let people know at work what it is. Like, so I'm sitting at a table. There's the round table. There's 10 people, probably 200 people in the room. I'm the only African-American in the room. The people at the table, they ask each other if they want to go to lunch and they don't ask me. So when they get back, before they leave, I'll say, so you guys didn't ask me to go to lunch. What is that about? And they, oh, you want to go to lunch? No. Well, what is that really about?
Yeah.
I need to understand why everybody at the table was asked to go to lunch. And I'm a new girl in the room. I'm new. So you don't know anything about me. You don't know that I'm a very outspoken person, right? You don't know that about me. But you skipped over me and asked everybody around me to go to lunch and not me, even though I wasn't interested because I don't want to be around people like you who don't know how to be inclusive and don't know how to respect and honor people. So the question is, how do you treat another human being in that way? Regardless of the color of my skin, how do you treat another human being that way?
You know, the knee-jerk answer that comes to me is because you don't see them as human. You know, you can only treat somebody that way if you have, and I think it is a generational. I know this guy I'm listening to, Resma Menaken, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He wrote My Grandmother's Hands.
Yes.
He's doing a lot of work with this, and just for our viewers and listeners, there's an awesome introduction via NPR show, that Krista Tippett's show on Being. She interviews him about generational embodied racial trauma that Black people have, that white people have, and that white people in turn, you know, oppression flows downhill, as they say. You know, whoever has less power than us, that's where we transmit.
Sure.
And I think some white people now may be saying, you know what? How did we get this way? How did we come to see people this differently? I think there's getting to be, I like to think, I hope, I know with me and some people I'm talking to, we're starting to get real curious about, wow, I do fear Black men. What is up with that? You know, with I had a dialogue with some of my, like a spiritual community I'm in that's multiracial, multinational. And we kind of brought this up, and some more honest white people said, it's the men. I don't know what it is. You know, the women would say, you know, I'm afraid of Black men. And white men will say that. And this guy, Resma Menaken, I know I'm butchering his name, I apologize to him, but he said, you know, we really learned this with each other. You know, the way trauma shows up the way trauma shows up in a family and an individual is their personality. The way trauma shows up in a family is their sort of their traditions and their behavior as a family, and the way it shows up in a larger group is their culture and those norms and stuff like that. And I know there's a lot of curiosity going on right now, and along with a lot of denial, I'm sure. But what do you think, our guests, what do you think needs to happen? I know, Alison, you just posted something the other day that, you know, was a big ouch to white people. which is, yeah, we love, I'm paraphrasing and I'll let you say it better, but you're kind of saying, yeah, we love all your posts of support and solidarity. It's really nice that you're seeing this, and like, where were you? And what's gonna happen next? Does this just become, my words this time, but we'll pull down a few statues, we'll remove some flags, we might change the names of some places, tweak the laws, but what's going to really change, I think, was what I was getting from your post.
Well, the post was really, it came from a classmate of mine. I decided to extend it because I had another classmate who was out in California, and she posted all of these things that she had learned. And all of her white friends were like, oh, wow, I didn't know. My goodness, thank you. Can I share this? Oh, wow, this is great. And it was great. And then my classmate said, essentially, well, what made you know this now? Did you think that we were making this up? Yeah. Did you think that we were exaggerating? And it just encapsulated, yes. At what point, we've been saying these things over and over again for long periods of time, trying to pass laws to make sure that we wouldn't be lynched, trying to tell you about these things, marching about it, making songs about it, all of this. This is not new, and it's not news. And so why is it that you didn't believe us before? And so trying to kind of make white people understand that it's not like we don't appreciate it, but what the F? What?
Where have you been?
What's going on here? And that kind of visceral response that we have, it took Black people a long time to figure out that we weren't the crazy ones. There's a song, Black and Blue. Why am I so black and blue? And in the bridge it says, I'm white inside. Now, of course, we wouldn't say that now because I wouldn't want to say that. But the idea was that I am the same as you. I'm not somehow this dark, ugly, bad thing. Can't you see that I'm like you? And I think that's kind of how we end up feeling. Chris Rock was saying on one of his comedy specials that he's like, well, things will be better when white people get a little less crazy. Because it's not, and this was maybe 10 years ago or something like that. Because it's like, we're not the problem here.
Right.
We are not putting ourselves over here. We're just here. And so that's the struggle that we have. And I've been listening to a lot of James Baldwin, and James Baldwin has been talking about, that racism has a really negative effect on white people.
Oh, yeah.
As much as it does, as much as the difficulty is with Black people, white people, you have a different sense of yourselves in relationship to others. And I cannot remember his words, but he really said some really powerful things about how racism affects white people. I mean, the mere fact in slavery that that you had a Black child, the slave master had a Black child with a slave, with a certain servant or a field servant, and their children, their white children, have slave brothers and sisters. That's a real thing in my family.
That's why I have green eyes.
That's that's something that
I didn't.
Yes, and I get it, because the same thing happened in my family, where great-great-grandma was raped by the slave owner, and 3 generations, 4 generations later, 5 generations, it's Latasha, right? This green-eyed girl, and so those things we forget about. We forget about that. And when I was thinking about when you said earlier about Black men, people being scared of Black men, it brought me back to slavery, where we see our Black men, when Black men are being sold because they're big and robust and they could do more work in the field and all of these things. It brings me back to that is part of the reason why people are scared of Black men. You selected and you made it clear that these Black men are the men that can do all the work, can pick up things, can work day and night because they have strong back, broad shoulders because of the muscle tone. That is the dynamics that was set up not by us as African American, but by Caucasian people even during slavery time.
And there were methodologies employed to make sure that
they didn't run.
terrorized these large muscular Black men. You kept them in a state of fear and dependence. And now it's the cat's out of the bag, so to speak.
Sure.
You know, we have a country full of people that were ex-slaves, and now white people are afraid of them because where we used to control, we don't.
And so you put them in the prison system, or you call them football players.
Right. Yeah.
You know, just literally, I mean, quite literally.
Right. We'll let you play music, but that's about it. You know,
right.
Love your music, love your sports.
Yeah.
But,
we'll let you get to a certain level, but the glass ceiling is there. You're not going any higher. And then thinking about, okay, we're afraid of Black male because of crime. Do you know that 90% of white people are killed by white people? Yeah. They're not killed by Black people.
Crime is a crime and murder is generally a crime of proximity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And most women are killed. Most white women are killed by their spouse or partner.
Exactly. And so we need to understand that and be clear that Black people are not a threat to killing white people.
Any more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about when Alison said the Chris Rock quote, like things will get better when white people get less crazy. And I was also hearing what Latasha said about that person who said he experienced Black women as being mean and bitchy. I just kept going back to Amy Cooper, the white woman who pretended that this Black man who was bird watching in the park was a threat to her when he wasn't. And I was like, that's the crazy right there, you know? And you know what you were saying, Alison, when white people get less crazy, but we are not, nobody's saying Amy Cooper. Well, now they are, but white women have gotten away with that stuff. And Latasha gets pigeoned as, mean and bitchy, but we're not looking at white women who are doing much worse. And they don't get called those names. So I was just thinking about both of those pieces together and just wanted to call that out.
This is where the arts come in. And this is why it's so important for us to have these things. The comedian, I can't remember her last name, Michelle, she did the White House Award, the White House Journalist Awards dinner.
Oh, yeah.
She did a special.
Michelle Wolf, right?
Michelle Wolf, yes. Yeah. And she did a comedy special, and she specifically talked about white women and how, there's been, you've had issues, but don't think that you didn't benefit and know how to weaponize your own whiteness. And she was calling it out. And, and that's the thing. Amy Cooper, liberal New Yorker, knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
There was not a small step. She knew what to mention. She knew how often to mention it. She knew how to make her voice sound. She knew exactly what to do in order to get herself out of situations. We are now, just now in the past few years, are we starting to actually acknowledge that this is a mode of behavior that allowed white women to get out of any situation. How many times did we hear about a white woman saying, well, a black guy came and killed my kids, and she was the one that killed her kids? You know,
Emmett Till.
Yes.
This, you know, just.
And that was the whole thing. It's
and she repented, you know, but her word was enough to get him.
That's it. And that is the feeling, and that is the fear. And one of the things that I've tried to say is that we are terrified. We're not, you know, like I talked about the vaccine on Facebook. You know, yes, I want this vaccine. I have spoken to no black person, and maybe there's one or two that I you know, in my friendship group, but none of us want to take it.
Not me.
Not me. I will not be first. We are petrified, petrified that there is something in there that will do damage to us. And because we have reason to feel this way.
Well, black people have been experimented upon, you know, just
syphilis project,
Nazis,
right?
Just like the Nazis did with us Jews, you know, the syphilis drama, you know, with the black soldiers.
Tuskegee experiment.
Yeah.
And so that is the fear, that nobody allows us to have fear. The only emotions that we are allowed to have is anger, frustration. We are, the only volume that we're allowed to be is loud, and we are also demonized for being loud and criminalized for being loud. If we are soft, there's something wrong, or you're not black enough. So you know, so it's like you can't fit any place as a black person who grew up in a primarily white neighborhood. You know, well, where do you fit? Right? You know, you don't fit here, but you don't fit here. I remember when the Cosby Show came on. I'm the daughter of two doctors, and the granddaughter of farmers and another doctor. So I remember when the Cosby Show came on, that was the only show we were allowed to watch. And that was the first time I had seen myself and seen my life depicted in any way, any place, any time. And then A Different World came on. It was the first time that I had seen a black college student, I mean, on television. And I have literal doctors in my family, not the first generation, but the second generation, people one step out of slavery. Right. So, you know, it's we don't get a chance to see ourselves, and you certainly, if you're in that position, you cannot, you have to act a certain way, you have to be a certain way, because you are the symbol of your entire culture.
Right.
And so you can never just be Allison.
Right.
You are the symbol. So one of the reasons that Black people tend to feel more comfortable with, tend to feel connected with each other so much more, whereas in white societies, they, you know, economics changes things up. You know, poor white people don't feel affinity necessarily for rich white people. It's because the rich Black person will get treated the exact same way as the poor Black person, wearing a suit, wearing a tie, with a PhD behind their name. It doesn't matter. So there is a connection. We're never really allowed to be individuals. So in America, which is this individualistic society, you have a group of people who've never been allowed to be individuals. Anybody who is of color is not allowed to be an individual. They are only allowed to represent an entire group. So if we saw somebody on the news and they got arrested, it was like,
right.
Hope they're not black, right? Hope they're not black.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Latasha, were you?
So one of the things when you see the news and they're talking about a person, we're sitting there with our fingers crossed, like, hope they're not Black, because it is a representation of the entire culture. When I walk into the school system, I am representing an entire culture, my culture, my family, African American people. So when I don't do something that I need to be doing, or something is not as successful as I would like it to be, it is not only reflected on me. It's reflected on everybody, every African American person in that school system, and the children.
Any visible Black person is speaking for all Black people.
Yes.
And those that come after. So once she leaves, every single Black person is going to be seen through the prism of Latasha, no matter what it is. So like, we have to be above reproach.
Yeah.
And so all of the people that are in the position that I'm in, they don't have doctorates. So why do I have to have all of this? And so even this was ingrained in me as a child. You know, Latasha, you're going to have twice as much education as the white person to get the same job as them. That's been ingrained in me since I was a very young child. So hence, for a master's degree and a doctorate, like, who does that and why? Like, what is that really about?
Look at this. This is the other side. So if Black people have to be twice as good, that means that white people get to be half as good.
Yep.
And that's I've just started hearing that.
Yeah. You know, there was a great meme going around, and it's something like, I know it's hard to admit you have white privilege when you've amounted to so little because of it. And I mean, I think that speaks to what you're saying, Alison, you know, like, a lot of white people, I think the resistance to this term of white privilege, which is everything you just talked about, a white person doesn't have to fear getting a vaccine because, you know, we said like the Tuskegee experiment. A white person does not have to fear going into CVS and making sure that they have a receipt, you know, all of these things that you've spoken about. But yes, you have to be beyond reproach. But then white people we get to be half of that, you know.
Whatever.
But I do think there's that strong resistance for a lot of white people being able to just claim that we all have white privilege, because again, it's hard to claim when you haven't amounted to much because of it. Not to be blunt, but
it's invisible. And it's invisible when you don't know any better. We don't know it. We don't see it.
No.
I've got my eye on the time. I want this conversation to go on forever. We're about at an hour. I did want to circle back to something, Latasha, that you were saying, but you know, I know white people right now need to be looking at, like, what is it about white people, genetically or whatever else, that makes us so aggressive and so dominating and has made us infest the world and make ourselves parasites to other cultures. Like, we need to start looking at, no, the problem isn't Black people. What is it about white people that makes us have done this? But you were talking, Latasha, about like, so what are we all going to do differently now?
What are we all going to do? So what do we do? And so I feel like it's part of my responsibility because of where I walk, the ground that I walk on in terms of where I am in the school system, to begin to educate white people about this is what it is. So when I sit at a table and you tell me that an African-American boy should be labeled emotionally disturbed, I ask you questions. I don't sit there and say, okay. I ask you lots of questions. So an example of this is, there is something called the behavior plan. So I have a student who's an African-American male. He's on a behavior plan. He is doing extraordinary. He is knocking it out the box. We say, oh, he's doing great. He does not need a behavior plan anymore. We take away the behavior plan, which is, you know, just a behavior plan. He falls apart. And we decide that instead of putting him back on the behavior plan, he needs to be emotionally disturbed. And when Latasha asked the question, why don't we do this? And why are we labeling African-American boys as emotionally disturbed when we have a tool to support him in the school that was working, we decide that Latasha is an angry Black woman, and Latasha wasn't supposed to say that at the table, because now Latasha has crossed the line. No, Latasha is an African American mother, and just like we said before, when George Floyd, I want to say Foreman, George Floyd called his mother's name, we all was summoned. So when I'm at that table, they call whoever's name. They're calling Joshua Brantley, and I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer. And the answer is, why? Would you do it for your child? And if the answer is no, then we're not going to do it for this child. So the question is, wherever I walk, I need to be asking those questions. Why? Why is this happening? Why aren't African American people in that position? Why am I the only one in 200 people in the room? Why? Why? And then what are we going to do about it? So I can make an impact on the area in which the path in which I cross, and I'm going to leave my footprint. And my footprint is going to be, she asked the questions. She asked the question. She was not afraid to say what it is. And unfortunately, some people are going to be offended by it. Some people will. I'm going to have the courageous conversation. It's important to me because I have to work on healing many generations so that the generations that come behind them will not have to suffer the same. That is my goal. And I'm teaching African American children, why? Why did you take gym 5 times? You only need a half a gym credit. Why have you taken gym 5 times? Here's a list of the classes you need to take to graduate. You need to take these classes, not that 5 times. I know you like gym. And why are they putting you in gym 5 times?
Well, this is the thing, to speak directly to that. When I was working as a musical director and a teacher in the Bronx, I had to start talking to the teachers about representation for the students that they were teaching. And what I would request is that white people start thinking about what representation means, because they have representation. Caucasians have representation everywhere, so they don't think about it. So when this was 15 years ago, I was the only Black teacher in the South Bronx of a professional children's training choir, and the director and the executive, the director was a white gay man, wonderful guy. He's a wonderful musician, really great with the kids, the whole thing. And so they were doing this performance, and they had an orchestra behind these children. Now, this is in the South Bronx. So to be singing with an orchestra behind you, what a wonderful opportunity. Wow, this is great. And so I noticed that the orchestra was all white. And so in this whole group of Black and brown children, in the orchestra, there was no one there that was white. And so I mentioned it, and I said, and it was something that I was fearful about, because, oh gosh, I've got to bring this up. It did not occur to them that representation or seeing yourself is as important as the actual educational things that you are getting, or the information that you are getting. And so when I brought that up, I said, we're in New York City, the most diverse and most highly artistic place, quite possibly in the country. You can't tell me that you couldn't have found a Hispanic conga player. You can't tell me that you couldn't have found that. And he said, and replied, I got the best people for the job. And so I had to say, well, you need to consider this. We're not in the Midwest. In the Midwest, I might not have said anything, because you might not have had as a diverse a group of people, but we're in New York City. And that's a part of the education of being able to see what you look like. I had a student who I recently saw at the National Harbor and doing the Motown Review. And she had said to me when I came to see her sing, I saw her and I hadn't seen her in about 10 years, 15 years. And she cried when she saw me. And I was so happy. She said, Miss Crockett, you do not understand. I saw your afro and I wanted to be just like you. And she has an afro. She's Dominican. I heard you sing. I wanted to be just like you. I saw you tour. I wanted to be just like you. She had not seen anyone do what she wanted to do before I came. Representation means something. And I want white people to start understanding that's just as important for you as it is for anybody else. So diversity is not just about us. My mother used to go to the white school that I went to show the children, and she said this quite specifically, I want the children to see that a Black woman is a physician and that not all Black people work in the kitchen or the janitorial staff. They need to see this as much as my children need to see this. They need to understand that this is a part of the wider society. They can see themselves. I can see myself. You can see yourself. We all can get this information and know that we can achieve because we see ourselves in others. And that's just as important as the education that they're getting. And also we have the cultural understanding, just like you have the cultural understanding. So it's like, it's not that white culture is the default. It is a culture that was put on top of white people because white people weren't white until they decided that they needed to be white in order to keep Black people who weren't Black down. Yep. These are constructs. People used to think of things in terms of religion and ethnicity, land and property and wealth. There was not white people. There were Irish people. There were French people. There were Polish people. There were Prussians.
Yeah.
And there wasn't this just one thing.
Well, that's one of the things, I'm sorry, that's one of the things that Resmaa Menakem said that I really hadn't thought of before, that the term racialism, the seeing of things in terms of race, that had to be taught, and that was a construct that was not always so. And that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, what? How was that not always so? But he lays it out very, very well, I have to say. Before we wrap it up, and I want to say I'd love to continue this another time if you all are interested. Do you want to turn the tables? Is there anything you need from us at this point to ask us or tell us?
I would like to just leave a seed, perhaps plant a seed, because one of the questions that I'm hearing often is, how does it feel to be an African-American person today during this time? And I'd like to turn the table and to have our viewers think about, how does it feel to be white right now during this racially tense time? How does that feel? Really, and that's the question we need to be asking ourselves. And what are we doing? What are we doing to cope? What are you doing to cope? What are you doing to make a change? Mm-hmm. What are you doing to educate people who are white? Mm-hmm.
Alison,
those are the questions we need to be asking each other. Mm-hmm. I think I need to ask my white guy, what does it mean? Because I'm being asked that question several times, and that's my response.
Mm-hmm.
Alison, anything that you want to pose to us or say to us?
I would agree with Latasha about that. I would also, I would just ask for patience and listening, compassion, aggressive compassion. These are things that I struggle to listen. And so I would like white people to listen and empathize and have aggressive compassion for the situation, not, maybe a little bit of compassion or, oh, that's, oh, that's rough. But really, the compassion of when he called out for his mother, we all, we had to come. It's that, to really sit with humanity. That's what I've been struggling artistically with in trying to portray. And sitting in that place, because in understanding the humanity of all of us and listening and having that aggressive compassion, I think that starts having the steps to being able to be open to do the next steps, to being able to be open to having the conversations, to be able to continue to move forward, to stand up for all people.
And there is an urgency of now. We don't have time for people to get ready to have the conversation. We need to have the conversations.
What do you want white people to do with each other about this?
Talk, and just the things that we've already kind of said. Talk about, well, where did this come from, and how does it impact me? How did I get this privilege? What actually do I get from this system? It's going to be a difficult thing to let people to let people let go of power. Yeah. Power feels good.
It does, and I think that's my interpretation of these times right now. Why there's a Trump is this is kind of the, somebody said tipping point is itself a racist expression. I don't know the origin. I always thought scale tipping point, but that white people are not going to be the majority, and I think we're freaked as a color about that, and I think that's Trump. That's like, no, this wait, and I had a moment of like, wait, Bob, that's actually going to happen. Where are you about that? And I was a little scared. I had to look at like Mr. Liberal therapist Bob. I had some fear about that, that I got to look at, and I do think there are a few white people who are starting to say, how did we get this way? Can we look together at how we got this way, and not stop? Not stop after the latest act of violence, fades out of the news.
Yep, and I would like to say to white people, like, invite us to the table. My grandmom said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You need to be at the table.
What does that look like? Can you say?
Having discussions around this. How do we shift the mindset? How do we get here? How do we get out of this?
How do we get out of this? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, you guys. That was just fabulous. I don't want to stop.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being asked.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to stop recording, and then maybe the four of us can just close out with each other after this. Just want to say goodbye to our listeners, and thank you for listening and watching.